Hello, BookTube. This is the fourth bookcase, shelf tour, second shelf, the seventh part. We're going to start with a book that was out of place. It should have been with the Play-Doh books that we did on the last shelf, but sometimes it's where I can fit them. This is Leo Strauss on Play-Doh Symposium, edited with a foreword by Seth Bernadette, University of Chicago Press. Looking at the date and all of a sudden I can't find it again. I do this all the time. 2001. So it looks like this. Paper. The first major piece of unpublished work by Leo Strauss to appear in more than 30 years. This volume offers the public the unprecedented experience of encountering this renowned scholar as his students did. Given as a course in the autumn of 1959 under the title Plato's Political Philosophy, these provocative lectures, until now never published but instead passed down from one generation of students to the next, show Strauss at his subtle and insightful best. So, University of Chicago Press, Leo Strauss on Play-Doh Symposium. Then we'll get into somebody else I also mentioned earlier and another video. This is Isaiah Berlin. There he is, this young man. By Michael Ignatieff. Biography of the. So if you remember the video, if anybody remembers the video where I talked about the hedgehog and the fox. Are you a hedgehog? One thing, or a fox? Many things, the way you think. This is the guy who made that famous. This is 1998. I also mentioned his encounter with Anna Akhmatova, the great Russian poetess. Let's see if they have. There's Anna and Isaiah. So there's Anna Akhmatova and Isaiah Berlin. Wonderful story. So there's a life of Mr. Berlin. Here's Isaiah Berlin, The Proper Study of Mankind, an anthology of essays for Strauss and Giroux. Let's see. This is 1997. This edition I have, though, is 98. Edited by Henry Hardy, who you'll see does a lot of his stuff. And Roger Hoshir. Forward by Nolan Ahn. Introduction by Roger Hoshir. There was a... I can't even remember the name of the title. I won't say it then. Okay, so contents. The Pursuit of the Ideal. Philosophical foundations, the concept of scientific history, and does political theory still exist? Under Russian writers, you have The Hedgehog and the Fox, Herzen and his memoirs, and Conversations with Akhmatova and Pasternak. So anyway, this is a large collections of his writings. So if he interests you, this will be a good one to get. It has a little bit of everything in it. Here's another one of his books. So I did this without everything falling on me, which seems to be a problem with this chair. Isaiah Berlin, The Roots of Romanticism, which was the A.W. Mellon Lectures in the Fine Arts, Bollingen Series, 3545, Princeton. Let's see it right there. So here he talks about the roots of Romanticism. In Search of a Definition, The First Attack on Enlightenment, The True Fathers of Romanticism, The Restrained Romantics, Unbridled Romanticism, and Lasting Effects. It does have references in an index, so it's a lecture series. Here's another set of his essays. This is a pretty old Oxford paperback. I can tell it's old. It costs $3.95. Isaiah Berlin, 4 Essays on Liberty. The 4 essays here brought between one set of covers are concerned with related aspect of the issue of individual liberty, in particular as they bear upon the vicissitudes and the notion during the ideological struggles of our own century. Political issues in the 20th century, 1950, dwells upon dissimilarities between 19th and 20th century political thought. So, Oxford University Press, London, Oxford, New York. This is a reprint of 1977, dedicated to Stephen Spender, so those of you who know who he is. So the essays are Political Ideas in the 20th Century, Historical Inevitability, Two Concepts of Liberty, and John Stuart Mill and the Ends of Life, and has an appendix and an index. So Oxford paperback. Next, we get to revisit a writer we just saw on a previous video from this shelf tour. That's Paul Johnson. This has got a beautiful cover. It's his book on Darwin. Like I say, Mr. Johnson seems to try his hand just about everything. This is Paul Johnson, Darwin, A Portrait of a Genius, Viking, and it was published in 2012. So a small biography of of Darwin. There might be some truth in that little Freudian slip because Mr. Johnson's, he's an interesting fellow. But Darwin, Portrait of a Genius. Then here, this is New York Review of Books reprint. They do a lot of these. They're pretty heavy on fiction. This is The Crisis of the European Mind, 1680 to 1715 by Paul Hazard. It's introduced by Anthony Grafton. Translated from the French by J. Louis May. And let's see. So 1961 is when the original copyright is. And the introduction has a 2013 copyright. And the translation's from 53. So it's a complicated history here. Original English translation was actually published by Yale University Press in 1953. So it's just what it says. It's a intellectual history, 1680 to 1750 in the European intellectual world. Pretty famous book. This next one here, Hannah Arendt. This is Julia Kristeva's book on Hannah. It was translated by Ross Guberman. Let's see. It was translated in... So this book is from 2001. And it's a biography of Hannah Arendt and a biography of her thought. So Julia Kristeva, the writer, is a psychoanalyst and professor of linguistics at the University of Paris. Is the author of many acclaimed books, including Time and Sense, Strangers to Ourselves, The Sense and the Nonsense of Revolt, and New Maladies of the Soul. And the translator has worked on this author's stuff before. So it's Hannah Arendt. If you've read any of her other things, it's the life of her. This next person has had a lot of influence on how I think. Karl Popper. This one's his Unending Quest. It's a paperback from Routledge. And it's also white print on yellow background, so it's almost impossible to see. There is no philosopher writing in English who can match Karl Popper in the range and the quality of his work. Politics, science, art, few broad areas of human thought remain unillumined by Popper's work. That Brian McGee said that. So this is an autobiography, but a philosophical autobiography. Popper was a philosopher during the last century. I think he escaped from Europe and went to Australia. But this is the work of his that really influenced me. It's a 2-volume work. It's called The Open Society and Its Enemies. And don't forget, now Popper's living during the World War II years and all on either side of it and all that's going on there. So that's going to be his concern. But in The Open Society and Its Enemies, his first volume's Plato. And when you read Plato, he doesn't paint. He wasn't democratic. He was a bit of a reactionary towards democracy. He was an aristocrat, and Popper doesn't pull any punches when he deals with Plato. So it colors how I read Plato now. And then the second volume deals with Hegel and Marx, and that's just obvious. And we just looked at that history of Hegel in the last shelf, philosophy of history. So these are published by Princeton University Press in Princeton, New Jersey, 62 and 68, but mine here is the 5th edition of 1966. I think he's worth reading, especially as a corrective to some of the things people think about Plato. And this is the same thing, 5th edition, 66. Then we have a book of modern philosophy by Roger Scruton, An Introduction and Survey. Fairly conservative fella. Good thinker. I mean, whether you agree with him or not. This one here is Alan Lane, The Penguin Press. 1995. So he'll have contents. I'll just jump around. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I can hold it up that way if you want to stop and look at. So you have The Nature of Philosophy, Skepticism, some more isms, Self, Mind, and Body, The Private Language Argument, Sense and Reference, Descriptions and Logical Form, Things and Properties, Truth, Appearance and Reality, God, Being, Necessity, and the A priori, Cause, Science, the Soul, Freedom, the Human World, on and on. He has a study guide at the back and an index. Modern philosophy is seen through Mr. Scruton's eyes and his brain. And then here is a good book, Dangerous Knowledge. I remember seeing a review, and I think it was New York Review of Books, and I had to run out and grab it. Oh no, it was the Washington Post Book World. I had to run out and grab it, and I'm glad I did. It was a good book. It's called Dangerous Knowledge, Orientalism and Its Discontents by Robert Irwin. It's the Overlook Press, Woodstock in New York. And it's 2006. The publication of Edward Said's hugely influential Orientalism in 1981 called into question the entire history of Western study of Islamic culture, condemning this scholarly tradition as one that presented inaccurate and deliberately demeaning representation of Islamic peoples and institutions. Its effect was so profound that the words Oriental and Orientalist came to take their most negative connotations. But what is Orientalism? Who were the Orientalists? And how did Western scholars and Islamic culture come to be vilified as insidious agents of European imperialism? In Robert Irwin's groundbreaking new history, he answers this question with a detailed and colorful story of the motley crew of intellectuals and eccentrics who brought an understanding of the Islamic world to the West. In a narrative that ranges from an analysis of ancient Greek perceptions of the Persians to a portrait of the first Western European translators of Arabic to their contemporary Muslim world's perceptions of the Western study of Islam, Irwin affirms the value of Orientalist legacy, not only for the contemporary scholars who have disowned it, but also for anyone committed to fostering the cross-cultural understanding which could bridge the real and imagined gulf between Islamic and Western civilizations. So a corrective to Said, and not, in my opinion, a necessary one. Good book. That is the end of the 6th section of the second shelf of the 4th bookcase. Thank you, BookTube.